as everybody knows, President Trump, when he was campaigning, threatened, and speaking of trade deficits, there's an example of one when the U.S. has the $50 billion trade deficit with Mexico, 60 billion in goods, and in relative terms, that might not be that big, but it's still a sizable trade deficit, and that's through Trump's eyes, that's a problem. So he's threatened higher tariffs or potentially pulling out of the deal if NAFTA can't be renegotiated on better terms for the United States. He's also threatened tariffs up to 35% targeted on companies that relocate to Mexico. So what kind of NAFTA policy can we expect from the Trump administration? Recently it seems that there's signs that there's a softening in the potential approach on Mexico. In the very first weeks, it was build the wall and get out of NAFTA, but now it seems potentially could be softening a little bit, and maybe it's more like rewrite NAFTA than withdraw, which would be fine which would kind of fit along the ways that most people in the trade community view it, and even Mexico and Canada, because most businesses realize that the deal is 25 years old. It needs to be modernized. It's there was no e-commerce at the time. There was no shale revolution, and a lot of the didn't deal with the oil trade, which is very big now between Mexico and the United States. So and then there's a lot of other chapters that need to be improved. So people are in favor of that, and Mexico and Canada want to improve some things too. So it's not going to be a one-way dialogue with them just accepting demands from the U.S. administration. And then also, maybe a more realization on the president's part that NAFTA has provided benefits, including the interconnected supply chains and high U.S. content in the products. Interesting note. Mexico and Canada are a fraction of the population of China, but NAFTA consumers bought 36 times more American products than Chinese consumers in 2016. And on average, on a per capita basis, the average NAFTA consumer buys more than $3,000 in American products. So if Trump were to try and exit NAFTA, what would he have to do? He would have to first go to Congress and notify Congress of his intent to do that, because that's what the Trade Promotion Authority, that's the existing law, says. And then it's not automatic that NAFTA would be terminated in whole or in part. Maybe some high-level provisions would be, but a lot of provisions have been implemented through U.S. law, and Congress would have to go back and change U.S. laws that were, put in place to implement NAFTA. So, so you could have pushback from Congress, because there's a lot of support in Congress for trade and NAFTA, even though, despite the current political environment, and they could put conditions on withdrawal or somehow else push back or not change any of those laws. So it'll be interesting, and you've seen recently with the healthcare legislation and other things where Congress, even on the Republican side, doesn't see eye to eye or move in lockstep. So it's not a fait accompli or a done deal that if Trump wants to withdraw, that it would happen. Some people have speculated that President Trump could take a two-speed approach on NAFTA. He doesn't seem to complain as much about Canada, although I know there's longstanding issues on softwood lumber and dairy, access to dairy markets. But, so that opens the question, well, would he pursue a bilateral free trade agreement with Canada and not with Mexico? So one scenario is that, Mexico then, without NAFTA, would drop into kind of a more traditional most favored nation trading status, like most other countries, and you would probably have tariffs on the order of 2.5% to 3% versus 0 today on NAFTA content. Or if NAFTA were repealed, firms potentially could revert to claiming duty exemptions for unaltered U.S. components in imported finished goods under the 9802 provision of the harmonized tariff schedule, and then duty would only be paid on Mexican labor, overhead, and materials. So 3 weeks ago, the White House sent a draft letter up to congressional leaders announcing the president's intent to renegotiate NAFTA. So that's kind of the best sign yet that we've seen that they want to take that route. And it's very interesting to note that the goals articulated in the letter are similar to those, very similarities to some of the goals in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which, if you get down to it, really was, NAFTA 2.0 spread across, a dozen countries. So Mexico and Canada and the United States were all TPP partners, and it would have upgraded NAFTA. So, we may see some of those TPP terms, come through the back door into a renegotiated NAFTA. We know, I won't go into all the things the Trump administration is looking for, but we think they want stricter rules of origin, maybe to help U.S. companies, but also, to keep it tight that, from content from China or others, to have higher content requirements for NAFTA in the United States and less for other countries' components. They also, I think, are looking for quicker triggers for safeguard actions, and also maybe having language that, NAFTA would be renegotiated periodically rather than just being static. So the Trump administration is trying to draft negotiating principles with Congress right now, but it's going a little slow. I think part of the problem for that is that Congress wants to deal with the U.S. trade representative. There is no trade representative. Lighthizer confirmation's on hold, and they don't. Even though the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is one of the principal advisors on trade to the president, he's not the USTR, and so they might be only willing to talk to him at the broad level. And so, I think that once you get the USTR in place, things would go a little faster. Let's see. So ultimately, I think it's going to be a while for NAFTA things to move in that direction. But you're seeing some of the first steps or stepping stones being put in place to renegotiate it. And Mexico and Canada are doing the same things internally or with their own legislatures.